Well, hello and welcome to After the Sermon. My name is Tami DeLau, and today I'm joined with Pastor Steve Musto, who will be bringing our message on Sunday, and you, Heather Clutter. I'm so excited you're here. You are our children's ministry assistant, correct? Is that the official? Okay.
Well, not for long.
Not for long. Okay.
It's changing.
Okay, that's exciting.
Yeah, so this
so
part
let's
of this
talk
is
about it. Yeah.
Little announcement.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
So, director. Now she's moving to a director
Awesome girl.
role of our nursery and
Preschool
kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
So we are thrilled that you're here. And you are the only one on staff who has young children. So you're like the expert right now.
No
pressure.
Yeah, that's right. That's
No
right.
pressure. Oh, I have grandchildren and they've been living with us, so kind of get it, but it'll be fun to get your perspective. So I'm just going to jump right in and read those first verses.
And it will be obvious why Heather is here.
It will be so obvious why she's here. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, because this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may have a long life in the land. Fathers, don't stir up anger in your children, but bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. So only 4 verses for you this week. So.
Yeah, which is good and bad. Mm-hmm. It's simple, but that doesn't leave me a ton of material to work with. So it's feast or famine.
Yeah,
usually, it's like I'm waiting for the exact right length of a passage. I've never had one.
Okay,
but
it doesn't work that way.
no, it doesn't. They usually either feel, well, I got way too much to cover.
So I know you have challenged us in all of these ways. When children are spoken to first, God is changing that power dynamic that was happening in Rome. When slaves are spoken to before the masters, I love that we know within the audience of that church, there were many, and they were one. So
so let's go back to our household codes that we've been talking about. So the 3 household codes are the relationship between husbands and wives, children and parents, and slaves and masters, and they're really in that order. And children are included in this. So all of those groups are in the church. So as he's writing this, there are children sitting there listening. So it is very akin to what we do, like on Christmas Eve. We like to read a story or something for the kids in the service, and it's their time. That's their part of the service. And then unfortunately they are subjected to like me talking or something for a little while. But it's a very similar thing as this is being read. It's like children and all the kids, their heads are going to snap up.
So it was like in the churches that have like the little children's sermon, it would have been like that.
Yeah, okay. More like that. And these churches were 10 people to, max would have been like 25, 30 people.
Okay.
So they were small little congregations, but really neat that they got a chance to hear and be addressed, as kids.
Okay. So you're here, you got to peek at these 4 verses and know kind of where Steve is heading. What are you thinking? I'm just curious what you're thinking about being a parent and not making them angry and why they should obey you.
Yeah. I think it's a really challenging thing, and it's something that comes up all the time. It's something that we were talking about earlier that I've even thought about a lot as I get further and further in this parenting journey. Thinking about the idea of when you ask your kids to do something and give them an instruction, the whys or the complaining and the things that kind of come with that. It's usually resistance. Yeah. And
no way. I've met your kids. That's not possible.
Well,
it's possible.
Why don't you tell our audience how old your kids are?
Yeah. So my kids are, I don't even know, 10, 8, 7, and 4. We just had all our birthdays. So I'm getting used to the new numbers, but
10, 8, 7, and 4.
10, 8, 7, and 4. And so, anyway, I think a lot of the times with this passage, it comes up often, when I'm instructing the kids or asking them to do something and there's why do I have to do that? Or I don't want to. And, just this sense of that's your job. Like your job, it says in the Bible that you are to obey your parents. And it's as simple as that. And so
That's a really unsatisfying answer
it is.
to a
And I was
7-year-old.
it's either that or because I said so. And that was my least favorite answer from my mom.
The first one sounds a little more biblical.
Yeah.
Yes. There you go.
Yeah. I don't remember who told me once a while ago, but trying to use scripture to back up,
What you're asking.
questions or things from the kids. It's not just about obeying me, but it's because this is what God instructs us to do.
Yeah.
And so I try to bring it back to that, but it is an unsatisfying answer and they don't like it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. Parenting is, of course it's difficult. I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned as a parent, and unfortunately I learned it too late. My kids were already pretty well grown, but, and Proverbs speaks to it a little bit. It's the idea that our children are not the same. Those of us who have multiple kids, our children are not the same. They have different personalities. You handle them differently. And sometimes we put this on the parents and we say, well, you were easier on this kid than you were on this kid. And sometimes that has to do with us and stage of life and how many kids, but sometimes that has to do with the kid. And what I realize is that, I was thinking, well, I'm this kind of a dad. This is what I know how to be. And so, but Hannah, our oldest, taught me how to be a father. And then Josh came along and I just tried to do the things that I did for Hannah and it didn't work.
Doesn't work, yeah.
And it took me a long time to figure out that, wait a minute, this is how God is with us too. He doesn't treat everybody the same.
right.
God doesn't interact with me in the way that he interacts with my wife. He says different things to her. He shows her different things. He speaks differently to her than he does to me because he's a good father. And it's our responsibility as parents to adjust to our kids, not to make our kids fit into some mold. So Proverbs says, train up a child in the way that they should go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it. That actually the Greek is train up a child according to their bent, according to the direction they're already growing. So honor who they are. Don't try to make this kid who's an introverted artist be an outspoken athlete if that's not who they are. That's your issue. That's not their thing. You have to, as the adult, kind of bend to who they are and help them become who God wants them to be, not who you want them to be.
And then the beautiful thing for us as parents is, as we do that, as we surrender to that, we grow and we get to see some secrets of our own heart. So I must have really needed a lot of growth because it took 7 children to break me. So when I just sit back and I watch you and I stand amazed at the wisdom that you have. When you first began disciplining your children, trying to train them, did you always have the heart that you need to do this? I want you to obey the Lord. Or was there a period of just, I need you to obey so that I don't end up in jail? Because it's rough, you know.
Yeah. We're just trying to get through the day.
Yeah, we're just trying to make it. Yeah.
I
so
think,
how did your philosophy evolve in parenting and disciplining and training?
Yeah. I think back to when my firstborn was young and those poor firstborns. I was a firstborn, so I naturally was harder on my firstborn and still am, if I'm being honest. And we have conversations often. Now he's 10 and he's starting to realize that too, that, I'm naturally, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
I think personalities come out too, when you're dealing with parents and kids, like we're all different, but sometimes we're really similar and those personalities, but I look back at those early years and how much of our parenting and how much of those moments of, expecting obedience. I think we got caught up in some of the smaller things more and hung up on, we expected so much more. And as we've grown, as I've grown as a mother, there's times where you learn this isn't a battle I need to fight, or,
Yeah.
and trying to, that whole pick your battles thing.
Yeah.
I think, it was something that I didn't fully understand before, because you enter this with certain expectations. And I thought, I do need my kids to obey me. I need them to respect me. And the only way to get that is to enforce it, make sure that they obey, make sure they know that they need to obey. And so you kind of start out a little bit more rigid and a little bit more structured, or I don't know, those expectations are just a little higher or a little different than maybe now 10 years into it, and thinking, it's really okay if the shoe is not tied a certain way, or I don't know, that's a weird example, but the little things don't matter as much. And so that, I don't know, it shifts a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's two words that Paul uses that we're going to talk about
in the service.
Yeah. And it's obey is the first one, and honor. And those two words, they mean different things. And I think one of the things you're talking about, Heather, is your kids are at an age where obedience is really essential for safety, for life lessons, for all kinds of things. Right. Obedience is important. Yeah. If we just continue to carry obedience as the standard into their teen years, it's all about obedience. It's all about obedience. They're going to miss out on the honor piece, and the two words are different words. So obedience is exactly what we think of. Just obey. It's doing what you're told. Yeah. Honor is actually a word of worth and value. So how many of us later in life look back and there are parts that we value about our parents? I didn't value that at the time, but boy, I value that now, and that's what we're building towards is this letting our kids see that the obedience was for a purpose. It was to bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. And now they honor that and they go, my parents, they actually had some things figured out. They weren't perfect, but they did some really good things. And I want to bring that forward to my kids. This is why people will walk in the door of this church often. How many stories do we hear that go like this? I don't really go to church, but we got, my parents took us when we were kids. I stopped going to church. Now I got my own kids and we're kind of realizing maybe they were onto something. We should bring our kids to church. So even that is part of bringing them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. That's in there,
So ultimately then, if the end game is we want our children to honor us, we want them to honor Christ in us. We want them to honor the Lord ultimately. Yeah. Okay.
And to do that, we have to be worth honoring and obeying. Yeah.
So I think I know you're going to speak in your sermon that oftentimes children that grow up in the church do not honor their parents. And part of the reason is the church persona and the home persona are two different things. Yeah. And they see that.
Yeah.
How do we have eyes to see that we're doing that? And how is one challenged that way? Like, do we ask our kids? You know what I mean? Like, it's an interesting thought.
It is. And I really, we talked last week. I actually wanted to see if our daughter Hannah could come up and be on the podcast this week for this discussion. And, I remember my dad was on the stage a lot as a pastor, but he would say something. There's one thing that he would say. He would tell audiences this with all of the kids in the room. He would say, if there's something out of line in our lives,
our
families will tell us. My kids are here. They know that we live this in the home, that this is real. And the word our word hypocrite is a Greek word. It's from Paul's era. It's Hippocrates. And Hippocrates it's from the theater. And it's two different masks. You wear this mask and you're one character, and then you hold this other mask up. It's a different character. Two faces. And that's the idea of being two-faced.
Okay.
So our kids pick up on this.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, wait a second. That's not who you're saying you are out there. Who you're representing that you are is not who you are in here. And you are eventually going to overwhelm your presence in the home. Hours and hours and hours is going to overwhelm an hour and 15 minutes on a Sunday. That your persona of who you are at church is not going to overwhelm who you are at home.
Sure.
It's going to be the other way around.
I think of those times. Your generation cracks me up because you guys really don't talk on the phone like my generation.
No, we
did.
do.
And so, in fact, I'm always afraid to call someone, under 30. I feel like I have to only text. But we talked on the phone. That was our survival method. And I vividly remember being frustrated with my kids, probably talking in a tone that was not words of life, it was more words of death. And the phone would ring and you pick up the phone. It's like, hello. And I'm what did that teach my babies, So this is good stuff. So I have a question for you. I don't even know if you're going to talk about this. You read, honor your father and mother that your day may be long in the land in which the Lord your God is giving you.
Yep.
And good children die. Like, like how, what do you do with that?
Yeah, that's good. So Paul's quoting from Exodus 20 and Exodus, this is the 10 Commandments. So what are the 10 Commandments? They're the establishment of the rules once they enter the promised land.
To build a community
So he's teaching them because they've never done this before.
Because they've been slaves.
They've been 400 years of slavery.
Right.
They don't know how to be their own people. And so he lays down all of these laws for them through Moses. And this is part of that.
Okay.
And what Paul points out is this is a law that has a promise attached to it. In other words, if you get this wrong, if you don't obey, if you become a rebellious and stiff-necked people and you go a different direction, you're not going to be in the land for long.
Okay.
I'll wipe you out.
Okay.
And of course, that's exactly what happens.
Okay.
And so it's disobedience, and the disobedience starts in the home.
Okay.
So here's a story. I don't think I'm going to use this story this weekend. We know some folks who are fairly wealthy, and they donated money to a school, to a private school. And one of the grandkids of the person who gave the money was walking by one day and saw the little plaque that said, that his grandparents had given this money, and came home and told, Grandpa, and it was like,
he was proud of his grandpa.
Yeah, kind of proud of his grandpa, but just said, hey, I want you to, know this is up. And Grandpa was like, hey, that's great. And he said, but Grandpa, I also remember you saying that when we give money, we shouldn't make a big deal about it, and people shouldn't know who we are. He said, you're absolutely right. And he called and had that plaque taken down. And
that's cool.
It's a great example of, you think you're putting one over? Really? You think you're putting one over on the kids? They see everything. How many times have you had, but Mom, you said, and they remind you, they have really good memories.
Sometimes, and then those are the times. And they do. And they're very perceptive. And anytime that I'll say it this way, they're little mirrors too, So when I see how they interact with each other or how they're speaking to each other, and then I get frustrated by that and I don't like what I'm seeing, but then I turn around and use that same tone of voice to one of my kids, it's such a good reminder. It's humbling and it's hard, but I see the ways that I speak that are not words of life, like you said, to them. And that's how they interact with each other too. So they're very perceptive, and they are sponges, and they take it all in.
How do you and Spencer, have you given any thought to, the roles you play? And I don't mean roles in the sense of like what we talked about last week with men and women. And what I'm talking about more is generally there are strengths and weaknesses in each partner. So, what are the things that you guys both bring to the table in terms of parenting?
We balance each other really well. I'm a firstborn, kind of. I have an older brother, but I'm the first of 4 girls. So in a lot of ways, I'm a firstborn. I'm an oldest. I have a lot of those
traits,
attributes.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, there we go.
He's a youngest, so he's the baby.
Yeah.
So we're truly polar opposites in so many ways. And so we've talked a lot about, we do balance each other well. I am very much more the outspoken, like, you need to obey us, you need to do, what we say, and the kind of the natural lay it out there. This is the expectations. And he's the opposite, where, there is still an expectation of obedience, but he also, he grounds me well and reminds me that they are kids, and we can have fun still, and we can have grace and softness in how we approach some of these things, and not the hard kind of drill sergeant sort of tendencies that I tend to lean toward. And so having that balance is really helpful, because it helps us find a middle ground somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really good. I know the one thing, as Andy and I are watching our children be parents, it's really hard, because sometimes you want to speak in, but you're not quite sure it's appropriate.
Sure.
But the one thing that, if we could sit them all down around a table and say, okay, this is what we're observing, and this is what we'd love to see you do, is watching children play their parents against one another. And Andy's like, Tam, I was you and Andy was Spencer, bottom line. And I think if you are a stay-at-home mom specifically, you really are the one doing the discipline. I never wanted to be the mom that said, wait until dad comes home.
Sure.
That didn't feel fair.
Yeah.
And so Andy's like, there would be times where I thought you were maybe being a little too hard, and I knew it was you were exhausted because you had been with them all day, but I never corrected you in front of the children, because I always had your back. And then we would be laying in bed at night, and he'd say, the way you spoke to Megan, and then I would go back the next day and apologize. And so there is something about being that team together. I love that he's even using the word parents, but being that unified team. Because if kids think they can play a mom and dad against one another, oh my goodness.
Right.
So
trouble.
Yeah. Andy and I have had the privilege, we had some kids living with us for a while as they were transitioning in their housing. And our one granddaughter reminds me so much of Megan. If I disciplined the boys, there is no justice in that girl. She is pure mercy. I mean, she's just she is my mercy girl. And she would be so upset with me. And Millie is following suit to her Auntie Megan. And Code was being hard on Callaway, and it needed to happen. And she felt like her dad was being mean. And so I had the privilege of bringing Millie to school and could say, I know it feels that way, but your daddy is helping Callaway. Like, he's going to be in the world, and he needs to obey. And if he doesn't obey your daddy, he won't obey a God that he doesn't see. And so it's super fun to be on this side of it. Sure. And I can speak into, mean daddy, mean daddy moments. So, yeah.
I think kids often do see discipline as meanness, or why are you doing this to me? Or, and they don't always understand that it's not fun for us either. Yeah. It's really not. It's one of our least favorite things to do, but it is important, and it is necessary for helping them grow into the people that God created them to be, and to learn those lessons. And so we try to have those conversations with them too, and make sure that they do understand it's not just because you disobeyed. It's not just because I say so, or the cause and effect thing, but there is so much more to it. It's a deeper thing than that. And it is for their good. Yeah.
But the words that are used here aren't even discipline. It's training and instruct.
Right.
Yeah.
That seems significant. Is it significant?
Yeah, it is. And that's it's a dangerous time. It's a more dangerous time. So you're teaching children how to survive in the world. That's part of it. You're teaching them life skills, because they need to live. There's no grocery stores. There's no any of that. So From the time you're little, it's like, here's what you can eat and here's what you can't for outside. Here are the snakes that you need to avoid. Here are the, you're teaching your kids, training your children just how to survive. We do it differently in our day because we live in a safe environment. But there are a lot of parts of the world where they're still doing this.
Okay.
So
where it looks more like what it would have looked like to the Israelites.
Right.
Okay.
And to Ephesus, to the Gentile in general, Gentiles didn't educate girls. The Jews did. The Jewish people had a higher value on girls and women, and they would often get education. They could read and write. Not all of them, but many of them could. In the Gentile world, they just weren't that important.
Okay.
And so only boys would be instructed, and they'd be instructed in philosophy and in reading and writing, in athletics, in math. This is Pythagoras, the days of Pythagoras. They're learning the Pythagorean theorem, and they're learning how to do algebra and, physics and stuff that would surprise us, the things that they were learning. But they truly were. And so they were getting education. Girls were not. Girls were learning how to take care of a home, how to do those things. So he's writing to a church that is made up almost entirely of Gentiles. And that even the educational piece and the cultural view piece changes how you educate your kids, how you discipline your kids, because you can't expect the same thing from a 6-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl when one has structure and is running around all day, but is getting instructed and is with friends and whatever, and the 6-year-old girl doesn't have any of those things. Like, how would you even balance that? And so there are a lot of considerations here that we don't think about. We moved when I was 9 years old. We moved from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to Chicago, and I tell everybody that in Florida they teach officer safety wouldn't come to the school to teach us like bike riding safety. Okay. It was FFG, Florida Fish and Game, would come and teach us about this. These are the jellyfish you don't touch. If you see a fin in the water, you don't go in the water. If you see an alligator, here's what you do. Here's what they sound like. Like, we're learning some of this stuff is just to keep us alive. They don't have that in Chicago. There is no like, this alligator, don't touch this snake, any of that kind of stuff. It was bicycle safety and stranger danger. Different part of the country. And so that, we need to give thought to that too, that's happening in their world.
Okay. So here's a question. This is being written to children that are still within the home, and parents have authority.
Sort of.
It doesn't. Okay. What about the woman who's 35 and she is told, you need to honor your father. He has authority over you.
Right.
Shepherd that for me.
Yeah. We'll talk about it a little bit in the message, but this is, so for our friends who are in Asian culture, Middle Eastern culture, it is much more of a, or even Latin American culture. Okay. There's much more of a, who is the oldest male? Okay. Who's the oldest male? Because grandfather has the authority in the family. Families live together. And so the oldest male is the one who has the authority, whoever that is. So even in our home, we would probably be living with one of our parents or both of our parents. If we were in if we were in their day, Kathy and I would be living with her parents or something, and her father, who's 95, would outrank me. And even if it were my house, he would outrank me, and he could overrule me in the house. And the multiple generations would live together. Our daughter is, going to get married soon. She would probably move in with us too. That's just part of the deal. Okay. So there was more of an authoritarian structure, and there was more of an obedience thing going on, as we talked about last week. There was more of a, hey, it's men. Men tell you what to do. That's what you do. And than there is today. But that was cultural. Okay. And so, no, a 35-year-old does not need to obey. Okay. But she does need to honor.
Okay.
And there's a point in time where obeying gets less and less and less and less, and the honor gets bigger, and then there's a point where those two things cross. Okay. So I don't need to keep my hair the length my mother would like me to keep my hair.
Okay.
So which much to her chagrin, she watches this podcast.
I was going to say, she's going to watch
and
this.
she knows exactly what I'm talking about. I don't need to, that's obey.
Okay.
But I also, when I get my hair cut, don't have to send her a picture and say, look, I got my hair cut again. Look how short it is. Because that's not honoring to her. That's like rubbing salt in the wound. She would like me to have like hair your length. Right. She would be still a little upset, like maybe a little longer than yours, but that's the, yeah.
Oh, wow. That makes sense though. That's good. And the reason I wanted to touch that is I think there was a movement within Christianity, specifically when I was raising children, that really pushed a woman needed to, until she was under her husband's authority, needed to obey her father's authority. I don't think that's even biblical, and I think it's caused a lot of damage. So,
did you ever hear that? Did you grow up in that?
You did you? Okay.
Okay.
All right.
A little bit. I mean, it was not directly, but certainly I have heard that, and seen that and observed that. Mm-hmm.
And I think the in the Lord part is so important too, because your parents don't know the Lord and are asking you to do things that God would want you to do. You certainly wouldn't obey that.
Yeah.
So
my, I guess the big takeaway would be, if I had a God-honoring father who I know walked closely with the Lord, and I were in my 30s and he told me to do something, I wouldn't have a hard time doing it if I knew who he was and that he was walking closely with Jesus and this was going to be a good thing. But it wouldn't be a necessity.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's good. Wow. We have 1 week left in our Ephesians.
1 week left.
Okay.
Yeah. So next week is the armor of God.
That's good.
And it's not what we think it is.
Wow. That'll be good. Okay.
Yeah. That is what you call a teaser.
There you go. Join us next week. Well, thank you. I am so excited you're with us and excited for what God is doing with you here at Bethany.
Excited too.
And thank you for joining us. Have a great week. Bye-bye.